Hi and welcome. We're just waiting for people to join. I think we've seen a few sort of coming in right now, but we give them a minute or two to join today's workshop. Yeah, so I think that we have to get going. We have quite a few things to go through today. So thank you very much for joining us. My name is Donald Linderud. I'm the project manager for this tool build for science-based targets for financial institutions, tool for temperature rating and for portfolio coverage. We did have a webinar a couple of weeks ago where we launched the beta testing period, which is running until Thursday next week. And we very much look forward to your feedback on this. We'll come on to that a little bit later. But this is how it's going to go down today. As normal, when it comes to a webinar, you have a Q&A box, but you can also in this one raise your hand so that you can speak. And we would really encourage that because we want this to be more of a workshop environment rather than us doing a one-way communication. So we would very much like to hear your feedback and your questions and your thoughts around this if you had the opportunity to play around with it. So please use those, raise your hand if you want to speak, or type in your questions in the Q&A. People on the call today is Lisa, Houston, Owen, and me. Owen is one of the brains behind the methodology especially for the temperature scoring. And Houston and Lisa comes from our development partners at Untitled and Exchange. So today's agenda, I'm going to give you a hopefully brief overview of SBTI-Finance and the tool and why we built it. And the goal for today is to get you up and running, to get you up to speed with how to actually use this tool for analysis of target setting. SBTI was founded by WRI, CDP, and WWF, and we've had for a long time a technical partner, Guidehouse, who's helped us with developing both methodologies and tools around this. For this particular build, we've had the kind of help from OS Climate and Untitled Finance, who has codified our methodology. And this tool that we're talking about here sits within the SBTI-Finance framework, which includes criteria, methods, and guidance. And the guidance was released yesterday, so you can go to our website to check that out. There is also a consultation period for that, and we have a survey attached to the guidance. So if you would like to provide your feedback on that, that would be very helpful to us. But today we're going to focus on the remaining fourth pillar, which is the tool, which comes in different flavors. This tool is covering the SBT portfolio coverage methodology and the temperature rating methodology. The portfolio coverage one is a very simple one, essentially just taking your portfolio and looking at that and see how many of those companies actually set SBTI validated or validated targets or not. The temperature rating is where we take the ambitions of companies and convert them into a temperature, so on. So for we're not going to go into too much on the methodology today, because we did do that during the launch of the beta tool 2 weeks ago, and we also had a specific seminar webinar for this at the end of April, which you can find on our website, which you can go back and watch those recordings and read those slides for those. And indeed, download the methodology paper if you want that, to get more on that. So the finance tool, our thinking around this was that we couldn't find a solution that fit into the criteria that SBTI has. So we decided to build our own solution for this. And luckily, WWF and CDP, more importantly, had developed a temperature rating methodology that we included into this tool. And our thinking around this was that it was going to be open source, so that we can see continued development. SBTI is not a going concern, so it will be probably sunset at some point. So we want the market to take care of this. We want it to be transparent, so you can see exactly how we derive these numbers, these temperature scores, or temperature ratings, from the ambition of the company all the way through to the temperature. And we want it to be data agnostic, so that you can use pretty much any data source you want. If that is a commercial data provider, such as MSCI or CDP or Bloomberg, or if you have your own data lake, you should all be able to use that as input into this tool. And the same thing goes for the user interface, that we didn't want to say that you have to use this particular solution. And our thinking is that we want this to fit in as well as possible to your daily workflow, so that it sits right next to your value at risk report and or attribution reports and your valuation tools and all of that. And the tool that we have demoed, will demo today, and that we have released, does have a web interface. This is purely done for ease of use during the beta testing period. That's the primary objective of the user interface, and nothing else. So the thinking is here that they should be built into your current portfolio management solutions and analytical solutions that you have, either home built or from other providers. And as I said, we want this very much to be a workflow tool for portfolio managers, CIOs, ESG and financial analysts, and risk and compliance managers. The people who've been involved in building this is naturally the SBTI, so WWF, CDP, and WRI. The developers on this project has been Untitled Finance and OS Climate. And in this project team, we've also had kind of help from data and service providers such as Bloomberg, CDP, ISS, TrueCost, and Urgentum. We're also talking to a number of other providers on the fringes of this project as well. From the user side, we've had kind assist from Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance for feedback to that. So as I said before, I think I've sort of already described this this slide in words, but this is what I was talking about before, that we have sort of the data agnostic input and the agnostic output. And this in the middle here is the open source methodology and code base that we have developed. So this is the focus of today. The input and the output are naturally not open source, but these are usually commercial solutions, especially on the data input side, where it's rather cumbersome and expensive to gather this data. There is, having said all of that, there is data on our website from the companies who have actually set targets that have been validated and approved by the SBTI, those can obviously be a input into this tool as well. But there are many more targets that companies have set and that haven't been approved or validated, that they haven't submitted to the SBTI for validation. So we can use those targets as well in this tool, and that's one of the major benefits of this solution. I'm going to hand over now to Lisa, who's going to take us through the tool demo, and Houston is going to help us there as well with that. So with that, Lisa, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. Just give me a second to share my screen. All right. You should now be seeing the same slide as just now. So yes, we would like to just talk you through a bit now, and like Donald said in the beginning, let's make this interactive. So please raise your hand if you have a question kind of throughout what myself and Houston are sharing with you. And I hope, Donald, because you're not sharing your screen, you can flag if there's a question popping up, because I'm not sure if I will see it. Perfect. And yeah, so we'll help you through a bit how to think about preparing your data, how to run the tool, and how to interpret and what to do further with the tool's output. Just very briefly, obviously, the project has been about building, codifying, as Donald said, the methodology, the SBTI methodology. So the underlying open source code is available and built in Python. However, today's user group focuses a bit more on maybe the not so technical user, and for that we have, for the purpose of demoing and beta testing, also an Amazon Web Services based tool, UI, and that is very easy to get started with. It's online, it's continuously updated even now throughout the beta testing phase. And you can open it in your web browser and use kind of the data samples to run this. Alternatively, there's also a Docker version where you can run this on your local hardware and no internet connection is required. So you just need to install the application and then can run with it. Before switching to the actual tool, just a very brief overview of the different components. So obviously there is an import part where you need to import your fundamental portfolio information, as well as the target information. Then you have choices where you have user options, such as the aggregation method you would like to choose from the SBTI methodologies, the data sources, but also time frames and the kinds of scopes, whether it's scope 1, 2, or scope 1, 2, and 3. And finally, you also have choices of what-if scenarios, which actually use. Well, in the end, the tool calculates the scores for you. And you have various different types of scores. You have total portfolio scores aggregated across different, you can aggregate, choose by sectors and regions, for example. And again, across different time frames, short term, medium term, long term, and so on. And finally, you can also select the output options and then download your results in order to do further analysis with it. If I now go to the tool itself, so this is what the AWS version looks like when you go to the link. Then it's relatively straightforward. You first need to select your portfolio. So in this case, we have available for beta testing either a dummy portfolio that is, obviously a dummy, or we have one that is also related to the Urgentum sample data set that has been also made available for beta testing. So in this case, I will just choose that one, for example, then you upload. You need to then check that your uploaded Excel file is mapped correctly to the input fields. And then the next step is to select your data provider. In this case, for the beta testing phase, it's only Excel based, but eventually you can also link through to the data providers that you may already be working with. So here again, you can choose either the dummy data set or the Urgentum sample data that has been made available. You then upload also your data provider data. And then you come to the phase where you have a lot of these user choices to make. And here the point is that you make a choice this run, but basically you could do many runs and kind of choose various different options for testing. So here, for example, you need to choose the default temperature score. There are 3 available scores, 3.2, 3.9, 4.5. Let's choose 3.9 in this example. The same thing is there are various different aggregation methods according to the SBTI methodology. Let's just use watts for this time around. You have the different time horizons that you can choose. I'm going to choose mid. Similar, you have different scopes to choose from. You could also choose to display additional columns, which, for example, you want to see. So whatever you see here, you can choose to see later on, say the achieved reduction or the reduction ambition that is in the data set. And you can also choose to group your output by different choices, so country, region, industry levels, or sectors. So I don't know, let's choose country for the moment. And then you come down here, it's pre-selected for you already. The default is simply with current targets and the rest of your portfolio business as usual. So this has nothing to do with different what-if scenarios. This is just the default calculation, so to say. And finally, you have also download options, whether you want to download non-anonymized results or anonymized results. So then you just press calculate scores. It then calculates them. Just a moment. And then you can see here, obviously, like we said, this is nothing fancy. It's just functional for beta testing purposes. So you see here your portfolio temperature scores. You can see the time frames that you've chosen, your temperature scores. You can also see how many companies are with versus without targets. When you click into these buttons, you can always see what are the other underlying companies, the contributors, so to say, to this score. You also see how much of the portfolio is covered. You can then, if you scroll down further, you see the temperature scores grouped by category. So remember, I chose by country. So that's why we see the categorization by country here, but we could have chosen sectors or industry levels, for example. And finally, at the end of the tool, if you keep on scrolling down the results, you also see the temperature scores per company of your sample portfolio. And here you then have a selection also to download the selection or to download all. And if you press download all, it downloads into a CSV file. Maybe just before I hand over to Houston for a bit more the use cases, I just wanted to highlight here this what if analysis to you, because of course, aside from choosing the different aggregation methods or time frames and so on further above, you also have this functionality of the what if analysis. So in addition to simply running your current portfolio, you can see whether all companies, for example, what if all companies without targets set a 2-degree target and then recalculate the results? Or this one, for example, what if the 10 highest contributors to your portfolio set 2-degree targets? And these are the kind of what if scenarios that you can easily run here. And Houston will also talk you through now, the kind of results and outputs and thinking you can do when running these. Maybe just before I hand over to Houston, are there any questions on the tool itself?
Maybe it's a good idea to actually point out a couple of things when it comes to the what if analysis here. The options for A and B are very flexible options. They are essentially saying that you can provide in the input file for your portfolio, you can say these are the companies that you want to target. So these could be, for example, companies that you know well, that you have a good relationship with, and that you could potentially get them to change their idea about setting targets and so on. Or it could be something completely different. So, which means that you can obviously run this analysis and see, for example, on a sector or on country basis and say, hey, this is my hotspot. This is where I need to put in some work. And with the output from this, with the data dump that Lisa just showed you, you can quite easily then go back and rerun this tool and highlight the companies and say, hey, these are the companies that we want to target. For example, the mining sector or whatever it may be. And just highlight and just put that into the input file, the data input file for the portfolio data, and then run that under the one of the 4 A or B scenarios and see how that type of engagement would change your temperature score if you were lucky in all of those cases. So it's even though it looks like it's a little bit rudimentary, it's actually very flexible. Sorry about that, Houston. Do we have any questions? I didn't see any hands raised or any questions so far in the Q&A. Okay. So, Houston.
Okay, let me share my screen then. Okay, how's that look? Okay, so Lisa showed the various inputs. This is not meant to be intimidating. It's just saying how many there are. So we have 3 default temperature scores. We have 7 aggregation methods, 3 timeframes, scopes, and then the what if scenarios that we talked about. So a bunch of variation, but it's actually pretty easy to go through and pick what you need. The default settings are shown here and highlighted. So what I did is just download some of the data into that CSV file that Lisa showed you to do some basic interrogation. What we would anticipate is that both the institutional users and the service providers will take the code that we built and use much better graphics and much better ways to analyze the data. This will show you at least some basics. So Donald mentioned the what if scenarios. So what this spreadsheet does, which is just built from the CSV file, is it focuses on, it shows the, there we go. It shows those different scenarios. The base case shows where there's a reduction ambition. As you could actually see from the percent of the Urgentum portfolio that had coverage, it's pretty low. There's still a lot of companies that do not have any kind of targets. But so many of them have a 3.2 since we set the default at 3.2. What this then does is shows if the effect of the different what if scenarios. So the next one is what if set at 2. Obviously, companies that were at 3.2 now go down to 2, or 1.75 for the next one. In the case of this German telecom company, it already had a temperature score that was low, so it's not affected by this. It already has a target, but its target is higher than 2, so it stays higher, even though the default then is setting 2 for the rest. Same with the other scenarios. You can look through and see the what if for 4A and B. Those are the ones Donald mentions, which are actual, you select them in the input table as to whether you want to have them as a target. You can also use the tool to focus in on particular companies with targets. Again, the coverage is not good so far, and that's obviously an important point for SBTI, is to promote more targets and then to make sure that they're scientifically based, and then through this tool be able to empower you to analyze them and then engage with companies. So this is just filtering on actual reduction targets. Another way is to focus in on sectors that should have targets that don't. So this is just an example of, and again, this is all real data from Urgentum, just without company names. So this is in a data set of about 120 companies. So we see a few, there's an auto company there that is disclosed, an oil and gas company, an electric utility, but there's several others that haven't, some airlines. So this is just a selection of utilities, oil and gas, et cetera, many of which have not submitted any kind of target. So that's just another way to take a look at this. We do have the many ways, the 7 different ways to do portfolio averages, which really depends on what your intent is, what kind of investments you have. They are all calculated in the methodology document, and they're calculated in the tool. This just was drawn from a downloaded spreadsheet where we recalculated those formulas and showed them all in comparison. So again, you or data providers could easily build this kind of tool so that you have all of the variables that we show up front, but you could run through them and have the results in a pretty simple format, even though there are a lot of permutations. Lisa provided a couple graphics that are more likely to be the output that we would expect to see. These are just illustrative, but we can show portfolio temperature scores, SBTI approved or not reviewed by SBTI. We can show by temperature by sector. Here's a good map of the GHG emissions, scope 1 and 2, against the temperature scores, SBTI approved and not approved. So these are the kind of graphics that we expect to be developed by service providers, as well as the kind of thing that can be built in your own tools. And that's really just a very quick overview. Glad to talk about any other ways to manipulate the data. Donald?
Yes, thank you. Great. Thank you for that, Houston and Lisa. I think that was a good run through of the possibilities with this solution and how we get into and how we use it, and a little bit around how we actually analyze the data. What I would say is that, yes, thank you. So if you need any support on this, we have another week left of beta testing, of official beta testing. The tool's going to be available anyway after that, but we would very much like your feedback before the end of next week, or the 13th, actually, the Thursday next week. And in the meantime, you do have access to a number of support options from us. One is a Microsoft Teams group, which is dedicated for support here. you find the registration link in the documentation folder, which you have at the end of this page here. So the documentation folder is the docs.sbtitool.org. And if you go in there in the README box, you have a link to register for the Teams group. Or you can naturally send an email to finance@sciencebased.org to get support on this solution. And as I said, I reiterate that we would very much like your feedback. There is a survey, there is a link in the beta testing documentation that you do get when you sign up as a beta tester. And there is also a link in that README file that I just sort of highlighted. Also to that survey, we would very much like you to go through and answer as many of those questions as you want. It's a bit lengthy, but as many as you can, the better we can make this solution work for you. We do have a couple of questions coming in here, and I haven't sort of read through these, so I'm just going to read them out loud, and we see who can sort of answer these. So in bonds, there could be multiple constituents from the same company in a portfolio. How does a tool work in that case? Meaning the multiple counting will be taken care of, or will it throw off the results? Who feel inclined to answer that?
I'm happy to take that one, Donald. And perhaps we can just start with how the methodology will actually work in these cases. So companies, of course, can also submit multiple targets. So we do aggregate multiple targets within companies to give a single score for each time frame. If the company was to appear, twice in the same portfolio for different reasons, that is actually kind of captured in our aggregation methodology. So there's, as kind of Houston outlined, there's many different aggregation methods, but they will rely on the kind of the emissions covered by that particular company, or the sort of the invested value that's going into that particular constituent. So if the company appears twice, we would take sort of the invested value in each of those aspects, and it will be weighted. So there's no sort of double counting at that side.
Thank you. So the next question is, I would like to know where the data input comes from and the difference between both files. Thank you. So I assume that you, please let me know if I'm assuming incorrectly here, but I assume that you mean the data that is available through our documentation repository for the beta testing. So that comes from the dummy data file is completely randomized data. It's got nothing to do with reality whatsoever. It's simply data that is made to show that the tool actually works from a technical perspective, from a technical standpoint, and for you to be able to actually run the tool at all without any other data input. The second set of data that we do have is real data, but it has been anonymized. It's data that comes from Argentum, so that includes both fundamental and target data. So you, as Houston showed us here, we don't actually see which companies they are, the data is coming from, but you can see the sectors and the regions and the countries, industries, and so on, so you can get a reasonably good understanding for what the data actually looks like. So I hope that answers that question. If not, then
I actually have an addition to that too, Donald. Just I noticed in the Argentum data that that it was mostly complete in terms of the other factors like market cap and the other measures that are needed for the aggregation methods. Although it was not, in some cases, it did not have data in those fields. I mention it because I'm actually not sure of the answer. I'm not sure how the model would do those other weighting schemes if it doesn't have complete data. So that I just want to mention that, and also say that I'm assuming that that for upload templates, you want to be careful to have complete data for things that you want to measure. So if you want to measure, you know, those different kind of aggregation methods, you have to have the data in there to do it. Otherwise, it'll probably be bad results. Do you, Owen, I'm not sure if you know the answer to that, if it, but you can see in the Argentum data there are some that are missing.
Yeah, I mean, again, just from the method perspective, if there's not sufficient data to actually derive a temperature score or to weight the company, so for example, if we don't have enterprise value data or greenhouse gas emissions data that would be used for the weighting step, then that score will not be used as part of the weighting. So essentially, if you have a portfolio of 30 companies and one of those companies doesn't have sufficient data, the ultimate result of the portfolio will be based on the scores of the 29 companies with target data and will not reflect the company in which we don't have sufficient information.
Right. So the point is you need to be aware of that so that you're not getting a sort of a faulty result based on a low population of data.
So thank you guys for that. So we have another question here. Is there a plan to create default targets, a default target base using CDP SBTI datasets, or will this always need to be uploaded by the user? I can start with that. The intention here is not to build a service from this, because SBTI, as I said initially here, is not a going concern. It will be sunset at some point. So it wouldn't be very wise for us to build that service. So that therefore we rely very much on other people to provide the data and to provide the UI. And therefore we do not plan to do that. Having said that, in this particular beta test version of the tool, we do actually have a snapshot of the currently approved companies and their targets that are available on the SBTI website, and that is part of the dummy data set currently. So that, yeah. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to that. Okay. So another question is there a limit to how many companies you can process at once? Maybe Lisa, I want to take that.
Yeah, I don't, we've tested it with large portfolios as well, and there's no real limit to it. So it should be running smoothly, but yet again, it's the beta testing phase, and yeah, any feedback is very welcome. So if anything doesn't run smoothly while testing, please let us know.
Another question is, can the tool work with multi-asset portfolios? I can start with that and fill in if you want to add anything to that, but it depends on how you view it, but it's intended for equity and corporate debt portfolios, so corporate bonds. But any assets where you have a stated target can be inputted here, as long as you have one of the denominators available for that company, as Owen discussed before here, in terms of completeness of the data. So that you do have, for example, a market cap or a total assets or a revenue number or an emissions number for these assets. So it's not limited to those asset classes, but it's most likely that that's where you're going to find most of the data. Anyone want to add to that? Okay, good. So we have a follow-up here on the datasets question that we had initially. But when using the tool, not the beta version, where will the data come from? It is from each asset manager or data providers. So the holdings of your portfolio should really come from you as an asset manager or as a donor, naturally. The data could come from your own internal data lake if you have one, or you can use a data provider. So obviously Owen is representing CDP, and CDP has data on this, but we're also working together with other data providers such as Bloomberg and Argentum, as we have data samples from here, TrueCost, and now my mind is blank. Who else is in here? We've had conversations with MSCI and a number of Bloomberg naturally as well. My old employer do have data sets that can be imported into this, and we have been working with a number of these to be building connectors to this API, so that when you run this off, for example, a Bloomberg terminal, it will be a smooth sort of experience where you put in your portfolio ID and it downloads the data that you need essentially, and you make the selections through your normal Bloomberg terminal interface, and you get the analysis from that as well. So that's what we have built here, is sort of a calculation engine that is really intended to sit within other infrastructure, whether that is commercial infrastructure or whether that is your own homegrown infrastructure. Maybe Lisa wants to add something to that.
No, I mean, you covered it really well. I think this is important indeed to stress that, what you've seen in terms of the tool on the AWS, I mean, that's only kind of to make it easier to interact with it now. But really, I think what is really nice about this code base is that it will be fully integratable, whether that's your in-house workflow and or working with the data or service providers. So I think that's really how the uptake of this tool will also be really facilitated. Yeah.
So we have one question here. Is there any plan to add FactSet to the database? Well, it's really kind of up to FactSet to add themselves to this and to use this code base to include into their solutions, just as Bloomberg and CDP and TrueCost are doing, or ISS for that matter, and Argentum. So we haven't had any conversations with FactSet as of now, mainly because of time constraints, to be quite frank. But we obviously welcome them and Refinitiv and everyone else that is this player either in the sort of the decision-making sort of support systems or portfolio management systems or ESG data providers and such. So if you do have that requirement, I would strongly encourage you to get in touch with FactSet or your preferred data and service provider to voice your opinion and ask them to contact us, and we can certainly help them build connectors and integrate this solution into their own infrastructure. Any additions to that from Lisa or anyone else? No? Good. So another question is, have you determined when the tool will be finished? It will be a free tool, or would it be a fee or cost associated? So the project plan is for this to be released during September, and we hope to be able to present it globally at Climate Week on the 22nd. I think we have a slot. The SBTI has a slot on the 22nd. It could potentially be finished a little bit earlier than that, but that's the plan during September to release it. Will there be a cost to the tool? To the tool, no. To the methodology, no. The tool and the methodology are both open source. However, you can't do much with the tool and the methodology unless you have data, and that is not free. Apart from the data that you can actually scrape from SBTI's website, which is about 430 companies that have so far set targets that have been approved by the SBTI. So that is your first point of call. If you don't have any other data, then you can go there. Other than that, you need either to collect the data yourself, which is rather time-consuming and expensive. So I would suggest that you contact data providers such as those that we've already been discussing, so CDP and Bloomberg and MCI and those kind of data providers to see if you can sort of acquire data from them. And that is really sort of a conversation that you need to have with them. In the docs documentation repository at docs.sbti-tool.org, you find a list of contact details for various data and service providers, so you can contact them. They are deeply involved in the development of this tool, and they should know exactly what we're talking about, rather than maybe reaching out to your general sales contact that may not be completely up to date with this solution just yet. Any additions to that from anyone else in the panel? Okay. We have quite some time left, actually, about 13 minutes, and we don't have any questions just yet. Could we maybe sort of show a little bit of the actual Excel input file that you have used, Lisa and Jason, to maybe show a little bit sort of more granularity to what the actual data looks like when you actually download it? So that
Sure. You mean you'd like me to show the CSV file?
Yeah, so the input file that you used to get sort of the,
sure.
the output.
I can show sure, I can do that since we have my screen here.
Yeah, I think that could be useful.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me do that. Okay, the Argentum file is okay. It's the portfolio. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so there's the portfolio, and this is the tab that you mentioned, Donald, to where you are picking companies for whether you want to engage with them. So this is just the basic input. And then this is the Argentum data sample. So there are two tabs, one with the fundamentals, and this is what I mentioned. So this is all of the industry categories that are user defined, or a number of them are. This is where I mentioned, for example, enterprise value, a few missing fields here. So those would affect the calculations. No cash equivalents, for example. So that was one of the items needed for a weighted average. Here is the target data. And with the coverage data, scopes, et cetera, start years, end years, base years, et cetera. So those are the two files that go in. And then the file that comes out is a raw CSV, which actually has all of this data in it. There's the data dump. This is actually already formatted, but this shows all of the data that you put in, and then it shows the calculations by the model. It ultimately has slopes, et cetera. So it's calculating the actual formulas. So there's a lot in here that actually the service providers or users could use for different graphic presentation. And then in this case, I also then calculated all of these aggregation methods to come up with the scores. So this is actually more like a test bed to make sure that the calculations are working as we thought. Does that give you a flavor of it?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Houston. I think the thinking with the output file there is essentially that you should be from left to right, be able to derive every single calculation that is used in the tool. So that's
which as I was saying right before we started, I mostly was able to do, but there are a few things that I could not figure out. For example, multiple entries, which I was just talking to Owen about before the session, where there are more than one targets for a company. So let's say here, this company, a Dutch company, has different targets, and therefore I'm not sure, we have it in the methodology, I'm not sure from the download file how we actually calculate that, but we can follow up. There's one with tobacco that has more than one target, and the aggregation method does calculate that. I'm just not sure how the actual formula works to build it back in a spreadsheet to double check.
Maybe Lisa or Owen want to sort of chime in on that. Not right now.
Yeah, I've nothing really further to add. I think the same way we need to just clarify that point on how that's actually aggregated.
Yeah. Okay. So in the meantime, we've had a couple of other questions coming in, and this I think is directed to you, Owen. Could you talk a bit about the methodology behind the tool, how it calculates the temperature? Is it segregated by sector and perhaps other variables?
Yeah, absolutely happy to do so. So I mean, just to start with kind of how it calculates the temperature. So the methodology is designed to translate target ambition into temperature scores. So we take the ambition of any greenhouse gas reduction targets, be they absolute targets or different types of intensity targets, with the goal of translating them into a temperature. We do this via a series of regression models that we have built. And these regression models are built for all types of sectors. So we have general economy pathways, we have pathways for power, heavy industry, transport. And these pathways are designed from the IPCC models. So we've taken a series of these models and actually created regression models for each different type of sector, but also each different type of target. So if the targets are absolute reduction targets, or if they're intensity reduction targets, we have regression models that will deal with kind of all different types of potential target formulations. And what we do then is we take the ambition of a target, so that could be 30% over 10 years, which translates to 3% per year in linear annual terms. And that's kind of fed into this regression model, and then we're able to produce a temperature. So we can take then the ambition of targets if we have sufficient information. So we need target ambition, coverage, base year, target year, and we're actually able to translate that into a temperature. And then in terms of is it segregated by a sector or other variables? So it is done actually kind of on a sector basis. So we do have specific sector pathways available, not for all sectors, but certainly for the heavy industry, power generation, transport, fossil fuels. There are regression models that exist there. So it depends on how the company actually formulates their target. If they have an absolute target, we can use a kind of an absolute economy pathway. If they have a target, for example, on per megawatt hour of power generated, we would use the power generation pathway, and so on.
Thank you, Owen. A related question to this, I don't know if you want to take that as well, but essentially the question is, how exactly does the data provider sample map to the data provider? Is it done by company name or ISIN? I can start with that and say that we're not mapping any companies to company name or ISINs. What we're mapping is the targets, and it's not quite true in a couple of exceptions. In the what I just said, in this particular beta test, we actually have the ISINs for the targets that are available on the website for the SBTI, for SBTI. And there we use ISINs because the ISINs are used on the website, so therefore we use those. So that's one exception. The other exception is when we talk about the targets, and for some of these we actually need to understand, and this from memory is mostly relevant in the power sector, where we do have intensity targets that are the that are specific to the power sector. So there we need to know which sector this particular company is in. Still, we don't need to know sort of an ISIN number or anything like that, but we need to know that particular sector. And the sector classification we use for that is the ISIC classification, because that is open source. There are crosswalks to, for example, BICS at least. I think there are crosswalks to JICS and other industry classification standards as well. So those two are the only exceptions. But the rule is that we're matching the targets, not the companies. So whatever company identifier you want to use, you can use in this tool, because you provide that data to the tool. So when there's a full release, it will be empty of data. There won't be no data in this, apart from that sector classification mapping that I just talked about. Do you want to add anything to that, Owen? Was that okay? So we have another question here. In the presentation a couple of weeks back, it was mentioned that the tool will help the EU disclosure requirement effective next year. How exactly will that work, or will there be a separate session coming up for that? Do you want to take that, Owen, or should I?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how this was linked to the EU disclosure requirement, but I mean, in general, it sort of is helpful for all aspects of disclosure, TCFD, because it allows financial institutions to essentially run scenario analysis on their portfolios. So not only looking at generating current temperature scores, but looking at different types of scenarios that would be required to get them down to, say, 1.5 or 2 degrees, or indeed, for example, if the companies in their portfolios weren't setting any targets at all, what would be a business as usual pathway for them. So in that respect, it is widely applicable to many of these different reporting requirements. But specifically on the EU disclosure, I can't give any more detail.
I think the requirement there, if I remember those correctly, is essentially that you have to disclose how aligned your portfolio is to the Paris Agreement, which is a fairly woolly way of presenting it. I think that they've come out with a more defined sort of text recently regarding the disclosure, but it's still quite woolly on how you actually interpret that requirement and what you actually need to show for that. But let's just say that having the knowledge about what your current portfolio looks like in terms of temperature score should, in my book at least, I'm not a lawyer and don't take this as legal advice in any shape or form, should be a good starting point at least for complying with that EU regulation. Okay. I think we're actually right on time. It's 5 o'clock here in Stockholm, so I think that we need to close today's session. I thank all the panelists for your contribution to this and all of you who attended this session. I hope you found it useful and that you will go ahead and test the tool. And may I once again ask you to provide feedback through the survey, or indeed send us an email if that is what you want to do. Any feedback is good feedback. Just keep it coming and we'll make sure that we get a tool that is useful to you. Okay, thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you.